Okay, so here's part 2 of our review for chapters 10 through 14, Summer 2016 Anatomy 141. What provides the backbone for the spinal cord? And that's going to be the vertebrae, or the vertebral column. Not a lot of people think about that, but it definitely provides a backbone for it. And those spinous processes sticking out on the back side of the vertebrae also help with protection prior to like blunt force trauma getting to your spinal cord. There's a transparent layer pressed up against the cord that's filled with blood vessels that supply nutrients, and that is your pia mater. And the pia mater is always thinner than the dura mater. And the dura mater is like that shower cap on the outside of your brain that helps protect it. And your spinal cord and your cranial cavity both have those protective layers: dura mater, pia mater, arachnoid mater. The spinal meninges surround and protect the spinal cord as a continuation of the cranial meninges, and that is true. Muscles have the ability to return their original shape, which makes them elastic. Rings of muscle are really important in the body and their digestive tract. We talked about those, and those are sphincters. So sphincters are rings of muscle. The spinal cord has 2 enlargements. The tough outer covering of the brain and spinal cord we just discussed is dura mater. The area where the epidural is administered is the epidural space. Skeletal muscle is striated and multinucleated. The quadriceps are made of 4 muscles. The hamstrings are made of 3. Cardiac muscle, which is only found in your heart, is going to be striated and going to have 1 central nucleus per section. The brain of the gut refers to the enteric nervous system, which is the fact that your digestive system has its own nervous system. What types of cells are associated with the myelination of the axons? That is both Schwann cells, which Schwann cells are in the peripheral nervous system, and oligodendrocytes, which is in the central nervous system. So Schwann and oligodendrocytes aid in the production of the myelination of axons. A needle inserted into the subarachnoid space for the purpose of withdrawing cerebrospinal fluid or administering medicine is called a lumbar puncture. Smooth muscle is present in your organs, your GI tract, your uterus, your eyes, your blood vessels. That's smooth muscle. Cardiac is in your heart, and skeletal muscle is within your skeletal system. Your functions of myoblast are to form muscle fibers. What connects muscles to other groups of muscles to form large muscles? That's going to be fascia. Tendons, ligaments, and fascia. They are continuous with the epimysium, the paramysium, and the endomysium. In groups of muscles, the blank become thicker and become fascia. That's going to be the epimysium or epimysium. A thick fascia that connects 2 muscle bellies is referred to as an aponeurosis, and we talked about the frontalis and the occipitalis muscle and how it has an aponeurosis there on your head. The plasma membrane of an individual muscle fiber is called sarcolemma. So it's just you take a muscle fiber and it's got a plasma membrane on the outside, just like any cell in your body, but specifically on a muscle it's called sarcolemma instead of plasma or cell membrane. The cytoplasm of a skeletal muscle is referred to as sarcoplasm. So instead of cytoplasm, it's called sarcoplasm. So anything to do with sarcolemma, sarcoplasm, sarcoplasmic reticulum, all has to do with muscles. Thick muscles within muscle fibers are associated most closely with myosin, the protein myosin that helps with muscle contractions. Which protein looks most like a set of golf clubs? And that's going to be your myosin. Remember, it looked like 2 golf clubs with the heads of the golf clubs. Levels of dystrophin is closely related to what disorder? That is muscular dystrophy. The sliding action of that myosin and actin within your muscles is referred to specifically as the sliding filament mechanism. Muscles have to have action potential via voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels. That's true. So muscles have to have action potential, and they have to have it via these voltage gates, and those voltage gates are sodium and potassium channels. What percentage of the energy used by muscles is lost as heat for maintaining body temperature? That's going to be around 70 to 80%. Within your body, you have fast oxidative glycolytic fibers and you have slow oxidative glycolytic fibers. Please make sure you go and look at those in your notes. A first-class musculoskeletal lever works like a pair of scissors. That's a first-class lever, most like scissors. There are small masses of neuronal cell bodies located outside the brain and the spinal cord, and usually closely associated with cranial and spinal nerves. Those are called ganglia, and I think that was present in your first review as well. Dendrites conduct impulses toward the cell body. Neurons do not have mitotic apparatus present, and that is true. Axon terminals swell into synaptic end bulbs. And remember, we talked about the synaptic end bulbs and the synaptic clefts a lot, where neurotransmitters move across that cleft to allow or inhibit reactions. Neurons contain only two types of neurotransmitters, each with different effects on the postsynaptic cell. That's a true or false question. It's not. It's more than two neurotransmitters. You could have two, but you could have more than two. And there's definitely more than 2 or 3 neurotransmitters in your body. So the answer to that is false because there's more than 2. This type of neuron has several dendrites and only one axon. That is a bipolar neuron, which is specialized for sensory mechanisms. So this type of neuron has, I have a bunch of notes on my paper. Specialized sensory neurons are going to be bipolar, and multipolar is going to be where you have several dendrites and one axon. So multipolar is one of the most common that you're going to see whenever you see diagrams or the model that we have in class. Multipolar is going to have those bunch of dendrites at the top of the cell body at one end and that one big Polish sausage going down, and that's going to be multipolar. And then bipolar, which is the next question, is seeing, hearing, smelling. All of those are associated with bipolar, and bipolar neurons have to do with specialized sensory mechanisms. Motor or efferent neurons are mostly going to be unipolar. Diseases like multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disorder caused by destruction of myelin. Radiation and chemotherapy, of course, can lead to demyelination. Gray matter lacks myelin. A Babinski, or a plantar flexion reflex, is considered normal in adults if they flex or curl the big toe when the sole of the foot is stimulated. And you're going to get an opposite reaction than that if you're testing a child younger than 2. The brain receives what percentage of blood supply? And that's going to be 20%. Pain, temperature, touch, and pressure are all associated with the thalamus. That is true. Hunger and thirst are not associated with the hypothalamus. That is false. The hypothalamus definitely involved with hunger and thirst. So think hungry hippo, hypothalamus associated with hunger, and of course the liquid portion of that, thirst. A few other possible questions and review that we need to talk about is hydrocephalus is going to be failure of cerebrospinal fluid to form and drain properly, and then increased pressure occurs. Your brain neurons generate brain waves. We talked about in class about the vagus nerve being the ultimate reason why you pass out, which could be caused by many reasons, but it's shutting down to allow your body to help further damage from happening. You have 12 cranial nerves. We will learn what each of those do in lab. Those are in your notes, but don't worry about studying which one does which function. We will learn those in lab whenever we have the next lab test. Your longitudinal fissure is going to be a depression down the middle of the brain that separates both sides. Gyri or gyrus on your brain are the big bumps, and the sulci or sulcus are the depressions. Like your brain looks wrinkly, so the higher points, like the mountains, are gyri or gyrus, and the dips are sulci or sulcus. Spidery-like matter that we didn't talk about before, we talked about pia mater and we talked about dura mater. Dura mater, tough matter outside the brain, like a shower cap. Arachnoid motor is going to be like spidery type projections, and we did talk about that in class. And then pia motor is going to be a more thin, delicate layer that's like in between the halves of the brain and around your spinal cord. The pia motor is more thin and flexible. Electroencephalograms are going to study your brain by studying those brain waves. Your cerebrospinal fluid that we've mentioned several times is for shock and protection, so it's for shock absorption and protection to protect your brain and your spinal cord. You have approximately 100 billion neurons. You're going to probably see different numbers, different places, but 100 billion is one estimate. You have about 10 trillion neuroglial or glial cells, or glial, however you pronounce it. You have a pons, which is that poochy part in your brainstem that we discussed. So the midbrain, which is the most inferior portion, or interior portion of the brain, up inside the brain. And then that connects to the poochy pons, and then you have the medulla oblongata at the bottom. And the pons is going to be the middle section that connects the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. And the most inferior portion of that is going to be your medulla oblongata, which they state is the first part of your spinal cord. But sometimes they refer to the brainstem just as the whole brainstem. But specifically the medulla, they say, is the beginning of the spinal cord. But technically, it's all the brainstem, which starts with the midbrain up inside the brain. The frontal and the parietal lobes in your brain are separated by a central sulcus, which goes around horizontally, whereas the longitudinal fissure goes down the middle. So you have a longitudinal fissure that separates both the left and the right half of the brain, and then you have the frontal lobe in the front and the parietal lobes in the center on both sides, and those are going to be separated from the frontal and the parietal by a horizontal fissure, which is called your central sulcus. So you have a longitudinal fissure and a central sulcus, which separate parts of the brain. That's it.